A long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, a great adventure took place.
Talking Bird, a special edition.
Hello, and welcome to Talking Bird, the special edition, episode 77. I'm your host, Robert Zachary, along with my co-host, John Llewellyn. How's it going, John?
Hello.
I didn't ask
you. How are you?
I'm good. I didn't ask you beforehand. Did you watch the Oscars?
I did not watch the Oscars.
Okay. It was interesting. I think the best part was probably the end when the confusion over who won. It was kind of like, only in Hollywood.
Only in
Hollywood in the big grand scheme of things.
More like Holly Weird. Am I correct?
Exactly. I mean,
people, ladies, fellas, you know what I'm talking about.
Anyone. I mean, basically, the Oscars for me is like it's like the only parts I ever enjoy are kind of like the randomness, the stuff that was unexpected, and I can't even say I enjoy. It's like it's an experience, like experiencing the in memoriam where you always go like, oh, I forgot that person died and stuff. So that was kind of like, they did there was a very nice tribute to Carrie Fisher and a brief tribute to Kenny Baker and Debbie Reynolds. I mean, I always think of Debbie Reynolds as kind of even though she has no factor in the storytelling. I think, because she's the mom, she's Star Wars adjacent, and I feel like she had something to do with telling Carrie, like, you should go try out for that space movie or something when she was 19. But I think that, especially like waking up on Sunday, I guess, and finding out that Bill Paxton had died, that was a real bummer. I don't know how much you're into kind of alien movies or the things that are the movies he was in.
I saw a decent amount of stuff he was in. I always appreciated the work he did in the movies. I didn't see everything that he did, and I wouldn't say that like I ever went to see a movie because he was in it, but I thought he was a good actor, and I always appreciated what he did in the stuff he was in.
Yeah, it's like I didn't want to put you on the spot on that. It's like I keep thinking about when stuff like this happens. It's like, this year it's for like, Miguel Ferrer, who is obviously, he was kind of he operated in that same kind of realm that Paxton did. They're about the same age. They'd kind of done TV and they were in a lot of culty type things. And, and then, Richard Hatch, which he's a little bit more obscure from Battlestar Galactica, who he was in both of the Battlestar Galacticas. It's that kind of thing where you're just like, oh man, every morning you get up and you kind of do go through your Reddit or whatever. And it's like, who's going to die now? And they're all kind of dying. Well, and Carrie, of course, they're all dying around in their early 60s. And you're just like, is this kind of like a beginning of a health trend or something where all of a sudden all these, like I said, I was like you, I kind of never like, I got to go see the new Bill Paxton movie. But like he's kind of, I think that's kind of the difference between a guy like that and say, I don't want to name any specific actors where they kind of like shoehorn like them into things where like you're supposed to go see like, I'm going to pick on Bruce Campbell a little bit. Bruce Campbell, like I enjoy him and stuff like that, but when he's in something, it's like, it's Bruce Campbell kind of being Bruce Campbell and people enjoying Bruce Campbell.
You like Bruce Campbell, right?
Right.
Go see this movie that he's in. Go see Bubba Hotep.
Yeah, go see something like weird that he's in. Whereas I would go see a movie and then all of a sudden you'd go, "Hey, he's Bill Paxton's in this." Like the movie, the Gyllenhaal movie where he plays kind of like the camera, the news collector, Nightcrawler. He had kind of a small role in that, but you're like, "Hey, man, that's cool." It's like. And I think that's kind of what his career was like. It was like he definitely kind of could be a bit of a cult figure, but only because of he was the only actor that ever appeared in he was in he appeared in an Alien movie,
right?
A Terminator,
Aliens,
Terminator movie,
Terminator,
and he was in a Predator movie. He was in Predator 2. And so it's like he kind of was in that tapestry, and I don't know. My point is, I will say one person had a if you go out and if you're like saying like well, give me a good Bill Paxton role to something left of center maybe. I know him from Twister, I know him from Aliens. I want something where it was a little different. I would say, did you ever see the movie Frailty?
No, I remember hearing it was good when it came out, but I never got around to it.
And that was a movie he did, Bill Paxton did with Matthew McConaughey. And he directed the film because he had been a director. Not a lot of people know that he kind of got his start behind the scenes. He was actually painting sets for, I want to actually say Battle Beyond the Stars, because James Cameron was a set dresser for a lot of the early Corman things, and they kind of became friends. That's how he kind of got his start, being in, little parts. And Paxton actually directed, if you're my age and you watched a lot of Nickelodeon when it first came out and they didn't have a lot to show. Remember the song Fish Heads? Yep. He directed he directed that video. That was Bill Paxton did that video. He used to.
I had no idea.
Yeah, he was kind of like I think he was kind of not terribly different than the way young people are now. Like look at like Donald Glover. Like he started out. He does comedy, which I'm not
bon vivant.
Yeah, I'm not really. I don't know his comedy, and I don't know the Childish Gambino stuff. But obviously, he's very popular in all these things. He's got Netflix specials, and Bill Paxton was a bit like that. I mean, he was a director. He was in a band called Martini Ranch, which was kind of and it's like I've never heard it. Like at the time, the CD, I was like, I want to check that out. It was like kind of like. It was hard to track down, kind of like the Crispin Hellion Glover CD. Have you ever seen that? It was
I know I have.
Yeah, it's like a cult thing, and it's kind of like hard to track down. I don't think it's like, oh, he was some great musician, but yeah, he was a bon vivant or whatever. So, yeah, I mean, I kind of just wanted to acknowledge that. I mean, the sad thing is if we did this every week, we'd be like constantly. I feel like every episode would start with an obituary, but we're losing like so many people. I just thought,
Yeah, absolutely.
It's kind of a bummer. And I think, speaking of Miguel Ferrer, I think he is in the new Twin Peaks. I
believe so,
yeah. So we're going to get to see him again, and we're going to get to see Carrie again. But back to what we were talking about, the Oscars.
Yes.
It looks like Star Wars once again went home empty-handed.
Got out. Yeah, Rogue One was nominated for two categories, visual effects and sound mixing, I believe. Not sound editing, but sound mixing. Visual effects award went to The Jungle Book. The sound mixing award went to Hacksaw Ridge. No one really ever really cares enough to make predictions about the sound mixing award. I thought maybe they had a chance at the visual effects, but I could see The Jungle Book. Like, yeah, okay, I get it.
Wasn't there some controversy with sound mixing this year about a guy that one of the guys?
Was there?
Yeah, there was some guy, and now I don't have my notes, so I shouldn't. But it was a guy who had over campaigned. And he got
the sound mixing.
Yeah, it was somebody he worked for Michael Bay, and he did the Benghazi movie, which there
you go. The 13. So the movie 13 Hours, the sound mixer's nomination was revoked the day before the ceremony. Greg P. Russell, a re-recording mixer on Michael Bay's 13 Hours, is out of the Oscar race the day before the awards ceremony. It's rescinding his nomination for Best Sound Mixing for violating campaign regulations. According to the Academy, the Board of Governors determined Russell communicated with his fellow members of the Sound Branch Executive Committee during the nominations phase to make them aware of his work on the film. This violates official campaign rules, which state, quote, contacting Academy members by telephone to promote a film or achievement is expressly forbidden, even if such contact is in the guise of checking to make sure a screener or other mailing was received. Let's see. It's still in contention in the category as the three other sound mixers for the movie, they were able to keep their nominations. They just took this one guy's name off of it.
I see. Yeah, it's kind of, it's amazing. Like, obviously working in the crew of these things, I guess it's probably hard to distinguish yourself, so they kind of like, if they're like, we want to do this, I got people to know. I saw that movie. I don't have a surround sound at home, so I don't know if it was definitely a very intense film.
I've never heard of this movie.
It's what's his face? Jim from The Office. Like completely
the
Benghazi
ripped movie.
Yeah, he's like shredded because he's so tired of his wife coming home she's completely shredded, because she's done all these action movies as of late,
right?
Like Sicario. And
I remember seeing like one trailer for that movie and being like, I'm not surprised they made a Benghazi movie, but they got him to star in a Benghazi movie. Like that's who they got for this Benghazi movie.
Yeah, I would say that it's, there's a big question of the historical accuracy of the film. So I just took it I just watched it as an action movie,
a fictionalized account.
It's a kind of and basically I'd say the best comparison is that it's pretty close to oh god, now I'm blanking on the Black Hawk Down.
Oh yeah,
it reminds me of that, where it's like if you go in the history of Black Hawk Down, it's like that's not supposed to be a historical record. It's like there's a lot of inaccuracy. There's a lot of people who've been combined into different characters, and it's it's just like it's a it's unfortunate since it ties into a kind of a contentious historical event, but in its heart, It's a siege film in the same sense that, John Carpenter's Assault on Precinct 13 and, that kind of genre of movie where it's people are locked in a pitched battle for 2 hours. Michael Bay kind of is good at that kind of thing, and I'm just talking about
that's
action.
What he does.
I'm just talking about action. I'm not the story. Whatever. The story was the story. But sound. I mean, there's a lot of bullets and a lot of explosions, and with Star Wars, I think the reason you sent this article, Mashable, it kind of talked about that every time a Star Wars movie comes out, there's probably something a little bit with a higher profile nominated in the same category, so it's always kind of always the bridesmaid, never the bride. Well, at least since the 78 Oscars or 70.
The movie that became known as A New Hope that won a couple of awards.
Yeah, they even won special, they did a special Oscar,
a special achievement Oscar. But since then, the only awards that Star Wars movies have won, or maybe since since even the original trilogy, those movies didn't win a ton of awards, and since then the only awards that Star Wars has received are basically a career achievement awards for George Lucas and John Williams. So George Lucas famously lost out to Woody Allen with Annie Hall for the first Star Wars movie. So what this article is saying is that it's just it's just been a run of bad luck that Star Wars has never gotten an award. John Knoll, for all the work he's done, his Oscar is for the Pirates of the Caribbean, one of the Pirates of the Caribbean movies. I mean, I don't know. I'd say so the bad luck argument hinges on this idea that's like, they were just unlucky that there were kind of other worthy contenders. But I mean, you could probably make a case in every year that, like, yeah, there were good movies who had good visual effects or good sound mixing or sound editing or whatever else. Good directors put out movies every year. And the author says, like, no, this isn't to argue that, like, movies with more awards are better movies than those that don't. But still, if you're going to say it's bad luck, then that in some sense means you're talking about this idea of it being a meritocracy, these award shows and the voting on these things. And to some extent I guess it's not that the movies that win aren't good, but are they better than the others? Probably not. There are other factors that go into consideration. With John Williams in The Force Awakens, he was up against Ennio Morricone, who had not won an award yet. And so, maybe that played into people's thinking of, like, well, who knows how many more movies he's going to do. He's done so much. He's contributed so much. Let's give him an award this year. Not that the work wasn't good, but just, the work was good enough that a vote for him is not like throwing away the opportunity or whatever. And so, I mean, I don't know if it's bad luck. I mean, some part of this, I wonder, is that, George Lucas was very kind of famously anti-Hollywood union.
Right.
He resigned from the Directors Guild because they wouldn't let him do the credits the way he wanted to. And he for years and maybe even still does talked about how the unions kind of ruin everything. I mean, he's a pretty liberal guy, so if you asked him the same question about, like, I don't know, teachers unions or labor unions or something, maybe he would be more favorable. But at least with the Directors Guild and the crew, the people who work on the sets and all, the gaffers and all that, he's not very favorable towards those unions. And so, I do kind of wonder sometimes whether that played into it, that, it's like, all right, well, you don't like the way our unions do things. You don't like that system we've created. Well, then, maybe we'll vote for someone else. Who knows if that played a role in it.
Well, that's always been the kind of the conventional wisdom or whatever. That was generally kind of the what people would say when he would never say that. Well, maybe, like I said, I keep referring back to this book, the Dave Pollock Skywalking biography, which I feel like it was a less manicured biography. So yeah, he had kind of I don't think he goes on any anti-union tirades or something. And maybe a lot of this information is reproduced in The Secret History of Star Wars book, which I always recommend to people who really, really want to go deep into the impetus behind the original trilogy, at least where they throw in some of the salacious rumors and whatever. But yeah, he's always, the thing is like that he's constantly being punished for his stances on these things. And it's like, it makes you wonder. It's like, well, okay, now that he's no longer involved in it, if they really had wanted to show him, wouldn't they just start nominating all these, wouldn't they start giving Oscars out in a kind of, but then in a way, we have to assume most of the people that he was pushing against 40 years ago have moved on, either metaphysically or just onto other jobs. Because it's, like his old gripe that, well, the movie studios got bought up by all the beverage companies and now these people don't know anything about movies. And it's like, well, that's kind of every corporation that makes movies now. It's like they're all kind of, but I don't think George Lucas is that. Maybe he secretly wants a whole boatload of Oscars, and well, of course he wouldn't be getting any of them now because if they're doing. But now that Star Wars has kind of become, almost like a factory operation rather than one person's creative impulse, to paraphrase a title of a George Lucas biography. That they're gonna look at these things as kind of a piecemeal production of many different artists, and less cinematic in the idea of like, the guy that kid that directed La La Land. It's like, he's seen as an auteur, way more than say a Gareth Edwards. It's like, well, he just hops from, Gareth Edwards does franchises or whatever. I mean, there wouldn't have been a movie up for, Rogue One couldn't have even, well, I guess it was up. I just contradicted myself. I was like, I don't think it could actually be up for Best Picture technically. And it's like, yes, it could, because if it could be up for sound mixing, not that it ever would be. They don't, I'm sorry, They don't make these movies like thinking like we're going to get nominated for Best Picture.
Yeah. Right.
What do you take on this comment about, J.J. Abrams saying that like Mark Hamill's going to win an Oscar or something?
Right. So J.J. Abrams is, who is a producer of The Last Jedi. And so he's basically doing his job as producer, which is he's, pumping up this movie, helping to promote it, get people excited about it. And what he's saying is that he thinks that Mark Hamill is going to get an Oscar for his performance in The Last Jedi. I mean, he might get nominated, I guess. I think it would depend on how much screen time he gets, and what he does, and it's not that I don't think Mark Hamill is a good actor, because I think he has become a good actor. But the kind of movies for which they nominate people for, in this case, it would have to be Best Supporting Actor. But even then, right, those aren't Star Wars movies, right? It's your, dramas and or melodrama. It's a very, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but I feel like there's kind of a set of movies or types of movies that actors agree to because they think like, oh, this role, I'll be able to perform this role in such a way that, maybe I'll get nominated for an award or something.
Right.
That's become very clear with some actors more so than others, right? Like, I don't necessarily think like Amy Adams did Arrival because she was like, oh, well, maybe this will get me nominated for an award. Like, she may very well have, but the calculus on that is less obvious than it is for like Will Smith's last several movies aside from Suicide Squad, right? Like,
right. He's trying to get
he's clearly like, look at me, or even if they're not trying to get an award, it's like, hey, my performance is the thing that drives this movie, right? And for sporting roles, it's wow, I know I'm not the star or I'm not the main character, but I'm gonna give everything I have into this role, and it allows me to really give this character some depth, I should say, and when I'm on the screen, you're gonna be watching me and my performance. And Star Wars movies haven't really afforded a lot of those kinds of opportunities. So maybe this one will be different, because we've heard it will be somewhat different in the way Rian Johnson has written it and all of that stuff. But I would be skeptical. I mean, I think J.J. Abrams is, again, just kind of doing his job of, he's a producer of this movie. He's trying to get people excited about it. The Oscars were around now, and so he's like, oh, I think Mark Hamill might get an Oscar next year, or 2 years from now, or whenever it will be. So yeah, I don't really put much stock into it. Yeah, which is not to say that that's because I think Mark Hamill's not going to be good in it. It's just, to say that like I don't really think that's what these movies do, you know.
Yeah, exactly, and I think that's has a lot to do with the way people disseminate media in, like when these kind of rumors come out, that people, you know, I've subsequently heard people say it was that he intended that as kind of, it's a running joke kind of between them, which, you know, I hate inside jokes done publicly because it does lead to this kind of confusion. But I also think people tend not to, when it comes to certain things that they like, they turn the critical thinking off and they just start to get excited and be like, oh, you know, I don't think that people would like a Star Wars movie that had you know, a Oscar performance in it. You know what I mean? Like the closest I can think, you know, at least I don't really understand why one performance, you know, one, like, I think of something like a movie that is kind of skirts the edge of being kind of, you know, like a movie, just a fun movie, and then an Oscar performance. I would think like the best example of that would be, say, like Training Day. Like, I really enjoy that movie, but in like Denzel Washington, he is a tour de force in the movie, but then you watch it and you go, wait, there's like this whole story doesn't even exist in reality. No one has a day like this or something, you know, it's that kind of, so it's almost like in the realm of the fantastical. So then you go, well, it's a popcorn movie, but it has an Oscar performance. And that's kind of, yeah, like you said, it's kind of few and far between. It doesn't happen. And sometimes, you know, if all of a sudden, like, you know, Mark Hamill's giving an Oscar best supporting, you know, role in a Star Wars movie, people might be like, oh man, he's really chewing the scenery in this. It's too much, or you know what I mean? It's like, it could backfire. I mean, the only time I ever thought that there was a performance in a Star Wars movie that might have needed special recognition, out of all, you know, 7, 8 movies, it's like, I would honestly think that maybe Ian McDiarmid's take in Revenge of the Sith, believe it or not, of all the Star Wars movie, just because like there's some like when he finally kind of like when he seduces Anakin, and the you know, the opera scene is fantastic. Maybe I'm just thinking of the opera scene because actually later on all subtlety falls away, and then it's like, and my little green friend, and and a lot of like kind of like heavy theatrical. But yeah, like when he tells the story of Darth Plagueis the Wise, it's like he does, you know, he just kind of, well, like I've always made jokes about face. He does the face acting, and it's like he really takes it seriously in a sense where it's almost like you feel like Ian McDiarmid is like, yeah, you know, I've read the script, and like, you know, they've got a girl dying from a broken heart, and you know, and it's like, I really maybe I can raise this piece up, and if I really sell this story of Darth Plagueis the Wise, maybe I'll add some gravitas to this silly space movie. And that's my take on it. But yeah, generally it's like, I know that, you know, Mark had earlier in his career had, you know, had tried to, you know, I think I'm trying to think about like he only really did one serious dramatic turn post, which was the Samuel Fuller's the big red one with Robert Carradine and Lee Marvin. It's kind of one of these ones. I haven't seen it in a while. I used to have it on DVD, and now I don't think I do anymore. But it's not the greatest film. Unfortunately, it's kind of near the end of Fuller's career, and you know, Mark's good in it. You know, but it was kind of, I think that was like, you know, that would have been the kind of movie that people might have been nominated for an Oscar in, but
yeah,
it was kind of low budgety, and it didn't quite come together.
Yeah, I mean, the other issue too is that these Star Wars movies have been ensemble pieces, right? Yeah, I mean, that's you know, if you want to go back to the original Star Wars being based largely on the Hidden Fortress, I mean, the Hidden Fortress, even though Toshiro Mifune is in it, he's not like the main character in it. That's more of an ensemble thing. And so if that's the template, then, and that set the template for the rest, then you have, you know, multiple storylines going on and all of these different moving pieces to these plots, then you don't really have any characters who get enough screen time really that you could say, well, maybe that's the main character, and maybe, or that's the, that's the main supporting character in this movie or something. It's so, and we've talked several times, and I don't want to like go over it to death, but this movie has The Last Jedi is going to have so many people in it, that they need to keep track of, right? You have Rey, you have Finn, Poe. They didn't kill him off; they brought him back, so they're going to need to do something with him. Kylo Ren, Snoke, I guess, Hux, Laura Dern, Benicio del Toro. They're two characters. You're going to need to find things for them to do, and then you've got Mark Hamill and Carrie Fisher. Although we'll talk about in a second, they're kind of scaling back, I think.
Yeah. Kelly Marie Tran. Everyone talks about this. Kelly Marie Tran she's gonna be like this new beloved character and blah blah blah. But they don't talk about the character, just about how great she is in it. And
so, I mean, he's gonna be fighting for screen time, basically, or that they can't. I mean, unless he's like dominating those scenes with Daisy Ridley, and I can't imagine that he will be, but I don't see him getting enough screen time that the voters or the people who do the nominating are gonna look at that and say like, oh yeah, well that clearly should go with someone that's clearly on a par with Viola Davis in Fences, right? Where like she had it wasn't the main part, but she had a pretty big part in that movie. So I mean, that's the other reason why I'm skeptical that we'll see this. But,
yeah, I mean, and again, you bring up,
but then the Han Solo movie is coming up, and maybe that changes the formula, and maybe that becomes a Star Wars movie that is driven by the one main character, and so maybe that's where we see the formula start to change, and maybe they will start making Star Wars movies in the future with a recognizable, lead actor or actress and a supporting actor and actress that would get nominated for these things. Who knows?
Yeah. So yeah, you were talking. We're talking on the outline here. We got some talk about some reshoots going on this month.
Right. Yeah. So with Carrie Fisher's death, they had to do some rewrites to account for the fact that Princess Leia or General Leia is not going to be in Episode 9, and so in March, or I guess it's March now, so starting this month is when those reshoots are going to happen. They're going to be filming in parts of Scotland and Ireland, which is interesting. I don't know if that means. I guess where did they film the scenes from the Resistance base in Episode 7? Were those filmed in Scotland?
They're filmed in England, I thought.
Yeah,
I forget.
I did too. So I don't know if that means that she at one point goes and meets up with Luke on where the planet where that they filmed in Skellig Michael in
Octo.
Yeah. Right. So, and then they can't go there, so they have to substitute other parts of Scotland and Ireland for that, or where this planet is, that, or if that's just where they could get the studio space where they could build their sets, if that just happened to be in Scotland and Ireland. So that's starting this month, and again, because she's not going to be in Episode 9, they had to reshape the part a little bit, and so some of the scenes that were originally going to be in this movie are getting cut as well. So that's kind of what's the latest. That's what's happening with The Last Jedi.
It's going to be interesting. I mean, obviously, it's speculation. It's just when there's a change like this, it's I was thinking about like even a movie that at least in my take, of no real great import. I would say my point is, did you ever see that? I think we talked about this, that Now You See Me, or what's it called? The dumb magic movie.
One of the magic movies.
So it's like they're some of the worst movies I've ever seen. Just terrible.
Yeah.
And since I got this HBO thing, like free trial, I'm like, well, what's on? Oh, here comes the second one. Well, here's the, let me see how bad, because usually the second ones are even worse than the first. And Now You See Me 2 is absolutely like takes,
They didn't call it Now to See Me.
Yeah, this is like, talking about polishing a turd. They bronzed the turd or something. They really tried to make this into something important even. But one of the big things is Ilsa Fisher, actually, I guess she decided to have a child, so she actually stepped down for the second one. So Lizzie Kaplan came in, and like just the amount of like screen time they explain why the other woman is not there, to the point where it might have actually been behooved them not to even have mentioned it.
Wow.
It was so like poorly dealt with in this idea that, because it's like, well, they explain it and then you're like, wait a second, what does it have to, what are you talking about? Oh,
right,
she
it has
asked
no bearing on any of the rest of it.
She asked so-and-so if she could step out of it, and it's like, oh, okay. And my point is that, again, my heart and mind goes with Lucasfilm and how they're going to have to deal with a very sad reality of losing a principal actor in a production where they pretty much was guaranteed she was going to be a big part in 2 films.
Yeah,
it's like I wish them the best, because I feel like, man, they've got nothing but people like kind of like biting their fingernails thinking like, I hope that they're able to do this in a way that doesn't, isn't done poorly. It's, I mean, not the...
Well, and that's the thing, right? Because they didn't plan for this. They didn't know it was coming. I have to imagine that, her death is probably going to take place off screen.
Yeah.
Right? Like either they're, they film some attack in which she initially survived and now they have to change it to like, oh no, she died. Or they just have to come up with some reason why she died, and like, oh, there was a the New Order bombing on the government facility or whatever. Right. And just kind of like, I guess, find whatever footage they can stitch together to put her in it. That part, I'm worried that part is not going to be very satisfying. But then, one of the things we've also heard is that, there will be like a funeral scene essentially. And that's where, they're going to like, I'm worried that then they'll go over the top to like compensate for the fact that they had to kill that character off screen. Right. So the analogy would be on The Simpsons that the episode where Milhouse becomes Fallout Boy in a Radioactive Man movie, and then he like flips out and leaves the set. And so they, the editor is like, oh, I was able to find enough footage of him that we can make it seamless and stitch together. And it's just like him sitting on a couch in a living room, like delivering his dialogue while, Radioactive Man is actually like in a warehouse somewhere, and then like nothing makes sense. Obviously I don't think it's going to be that poorly done, but you're right. This is going to be tricky to manage in a way that not only doesn't like completely take people out of the movie and make sense and is well done in the context of the movie, but then also, because that is such a beloved character, satisfies the fans and makes the fans feel like this was like a satisfying resolution to that character's story.
Right.
And her character arc across 5 really movies, right? Like her character arc has a certain trajectory and a certain, curve to it. And it's like, oh no, they have to suddenly shorten that arc a lot from what they thought they were going to. And so, does that have any cascading effects, and does everything else feel rushed now? And again, make it work within the context of the story, but then also make it work in the context of like fan emotion and fan feeling for that character and identification with that character and all of that stuff that takes place outside of the movie.
Yeah,
and you're right. It's not an enviable position to be in.
Well, And the only other big example we have, there's little ones. There's Oliver Reed in Gladiator, which I don't think most people even realize that he was had a pretty small part in the finished film, but he had passed away. And maybe it's just me, or maybe I'm over analyzing, or maybe it's kind of that uncanny valley kind of situation where it's like when Paul Walker, had passed away during production of was it Furious 7, one of the seventh Fast and Furious movie. And I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that, like, how are they going to deal with this? They use CGI, they use pre-existing stuff, they used his brother, and the problem is that when I watch that movie, which is like, it has its own, it's
weekly.
What?
Weekly?
No, I don't watch it weekly. It's a ridiculous film, even beyond the death of Paul Walker. And the way it's dealt with is like, how do you take this cartoonish comic book movie and deal with it in a kind of a sensitive way? And it's like, I don't really, again, it was an unenviable position, and I think they did the best they could. But when you watch it, you're like, that the uncanny valley where you look at Paul Walker and like something about the way he looks is like that's not him talking to Vin Diesel, And
right.
One of the weirdest things, and I apologize if people are just getting into Fast and Furious and don't want a spoiler, but I will spoil it anyway. They don't actually kill off the character, which I found really interesting. It's almost kind of like the Milhousian kind of, I'm going to go now, or, it's like Poochie, when Poochie left. It's like, I'm going back to my planet. And it's kind of done in that way that he basically retires from it. And it's like, I think in some ways they dealt with it in a smart way, because they didn't want people walking out of this movie with tears in their eyes thinking about this young man that died, and they wanted people like excited for the 8th Fast and Furious movie. And I feel like that Lucasfilm has kind of got that problem in the idea that I'm sure they don't want the emotional pivot to be in 2 of their movies, like these beloved characters dying off, but they might still have to do something like that. It's kind of like, now we go see Star Wars movies and it's just people that they build up how much we like these characters, and now they have to kill them off. Whereas, obviously, I wonder if Rogue One might have had a slightly different ending if they had enough lead time with Carrie's passing away. The movie's already out, and then when this happened, but maybe if they knew that they were going to lose the thing, they wouldn't. That I'm presupposing that Episode 8 is going to have Leia passing away in it, but I don't know why, because I have no information as how they're dealing with this. I guess my point is like I don't think they want people to be stepping out of Episode 8 necessarily feeling how they stepped out of the theater with Rogue One, because there's a lot more emotion there. Like, you only knew those characters by the time they were dead, maybe 40 minutes. And some of these people are like, we're talking 40 years of having a character there.
Right. Well, and that's absolutely right about, how people feel when they leave the theater, because that's right. Everyone talks about, everyone who makes movies, talks about like, when they leave the theater, you want them to feel like X, Y, or Z. But what about going into the theater? I mean, because we're going to know from the very start of the movie that she's not going to make it, right? That like, this is the last we're going to see of this character.
Right.
And so what does that do to any, narrative, drama or tension or suspense, within her dialogue? Does it give all of her dialogue a different meaning, or do they try to build, or have they been trying to build suspense with what happens to this character, or given, her dialogue that suggests one ending and we all know like, oh no, she's not going to make it. So this line, right, there's not any suspense anymore. So there's that issue too, that, it's because now, everyone knows walking into the movie, like what is going to happen. And, with Han Solo in Episode 7, I think a lot of people figured out what was going to happen at the start of the scene between him and Kylo Ren, but that's not the same as like the beginning of the entire movie. I mean, this might be the first time. I get, well, that's not true because Revenge of the Sith, right? Everyone knew what was going to happen to Anakin Skywalker right from the jump. I mean, Phantom Menace, everyone knew what was going to happen with Anakin Skywalker right from the jump. And George Lucas was writing those, so that he did and he didn't write to that. Right. But this is a case where they didn't really have that opportunity to like write to that, to the ending that everyone knew was going to happen for this character. And so how they go back and kind of rejigger that so that we're not sitting there go like, oh no, I know what happens with this character, or you can dispense with all of this. Just get to it. Like, just, you don't have to keep building up the suspense because we know how it's going to resolve. That's the flip side of it. It's not just how people feel going in, but what's already in their heads going into the movie of knowing what is going to happen with this character.
Yeah, and and it also is going to create a probably a thing that they never intended, and now they're going to be doing it for a third time in almost in the most intense is not the right word, but the most I don't even know the word, but basically my point is that we have 3 Star Wars movies that once they come out, people are going to know, like, yeah, there's kind of an alternate version of this movie kicking around.
Mm-hmm.
There's the alternate version of not Phantom Menace, but The Force Awakens, which most of that was in pre-production. But then there was, there was stuff. There was less. There was a whole thing where Maz Kanata came back, and there was the handing of the saber to Leia that hasn't been depicted and will probably never be. Mm-hmm. Those things will be shown in the way down when we're all old and we don't care. Right. And
the fact that Poe Dameron was supposed to die initially didn't.
And so it's like, there's a lot of then Rogue One, complete, maybe a third entire, like, the character of Jin being a completely different tonal change, I think, is what I'm starting to take away from that. Is that, yeah, that was the biggest change was that whole aspect of how she came to the crew, and so we know that there's like a whole different ending and, these things floating around. Now we're going to know that there was a version of Episode 8 that involved, Princess Leia obviously, surviving, or, and again, we don't know for a fact that she's going to be, quote, killed off in Episode 8. They may have come up with something fantastic. It might be one of these things which they did leave the door open. I know that there are people like, CGI Leia, is that kind of thing. They didn't close the door and say, we will never do that. It's like they just said we have no plans.
Right.
And I think it was smart of them to kind of, calm some, things like people like, I don't want it, I don't want to replace with it. I don't want to watch a CGI version. It's like, well, we might have to deal with that. They've done it once. It might be that they had their conclave back in January where everybody came, and assume that was Rian Johnson and Colin Trevorrow and Kathy Kennedy and probably John Knoll and probably some people from the story group or whatever, and sat down and they had this meeting and they pitched a lot of ideas. And I guess we're just going to have to assume that they pitched the best idea that balances, telling a good story and being respectful to real human beings that have passed on. It's that kind of like, I'm crossing my fingers. But again, even when you do it right, you can't help but like when you know somebody's gone. It's the thing that a lot of people said about, Tarkin. It's like, it does keep, even if you completely mentally accept Tarkin, it's in the back of your head is this person is no longer alive. This person is no longer alive. And there's a great burden. I think even if they don't do a CGI Leia, when she appears, there's a great burden upon the filmmakers to kind of like, how do we diminish when we see, it's like, Or maybe they're going to turn into it. I mean, maybe something they'll embrace, and they'll break tradition and have for Carrie at the end of the thing before the titles. I kind of hope they don't. I do like they can do whatever they want in the credits. I kind of hope they, are able to keep the integrity of the saga in the sense that it starts with the crawl and it ends with like a 3-minute silence, and then it cuts to directed by. But I mean, that's just me. I'm a traditionalist when it comes to the trilogy movies. I'm willing to concede for these offshoot movies, but I kind of hope they keep them, but kind of keep them the way they've always done it. But that's just my feeling.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I mean, maybe we'll get like a thank you, Carrie, or something like that at the very end of the credits.
Right.
But but who knows?
Yeah, it's kind of hard because then it opens up, because one of the nice things about Star Wars fans is they kind of, when people are like kind of into it, they kind of view the characters, there's like an egalitarian view. So then you wonder, it's like, well, are people going to kind of complain, hey, no Kenny Baker? No, that, you know what I mean? It's like, why no for Kenny? Why no for who? This or that?
Right.
That kind of situation. It's like,
right.
They would kind of, but who knows? Again, a lot of speculation. It's a job, as much as if somebody said like, hey, Robert, do you want to work for Lucasfilm? I'd be like jumping at the bit. And then, but they said, but yeah, you have to figure out how we're going to deal with this. I'd be like,
yeah,
I might actually take a pass on this job because I do not envy them. But that being said, going forward, they are, obviously, the Lucasfilm is up to speed, and that means that they are looking for actors for episode 9.
Right. So again, to recount, we have, I don't know if you would count this as post-production, but The Last Jedi, they're on the reshoots and post-production phase of The Last Jedi. They are filming the Han Solo movie. So they're in production on Han Solo movie, and now they are in pre-production essentially on episode 9. I guess they probably have been for a while, but yeah, so they're at the phase where their casting calls going out. And the casting call apparently mentions that they're looking for both new lead and supporting roles. And I think the new lead roles was what surprised some people. We have no word on what that role or those roles might be. Perhaps after we see episode 8, we'll have a better idea of like, well, who's missing from this? Like what character is kind of being spoken around or of, but we're not seeing, or, other possible characters. I mean, lead character, for episode 8, I guess we'll find out, but, would you, I guess what I'm trying to get at is, I don't know, lead and supporting roles. I don't know whether that refers to the actual size of the role in the movie, or if that refers to kind of the caliber or status of the actors they're trying to hire, right? Because, Benicio del Toro, Laura Dern, the signs we're getting are that they're not necessarily lead roles. They're, more supporting roles, but those are big actors. You're not going to say, oh, we hired Benicio del Toro for a supporting role necessarily for something like this. So I don't know if they're looking for more big name people to join episode 9, or if this really is, no, we are losing some people in episode 8. We need to find someone new to lead the resistance now with Leia gone, or, we need to find, a new head of the First Order because something is going to happen in episode 8 that we don't know about yet. Those are all possibilities, but I also do wonder if it's just like, no, they're just going to hire. This just means that they're going to hire some big names. But I don't know enough about casting calls and the language used in casting calls to know if those are signals about anything.
Yeah, I'm sorry. What was the?
No, go ahead.
What was the source of this? I didn't. You just kind of put it in the note. Was this Variety or something? Was it?
I saw several places list it. Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of casting call websites that post it, and just kind of general, we report on Star Wars and whatever news. So this is from moviecastingcall.org.
Okay,
Who knows if that's a reputable site, but it says Walt Disney Studios and Lucasfilm, in association with PLT Productions and Ram Bergman Productions, are set to begin filming Star Wars Episode 9 in July 2017. Casting directors are setting up auditions. And then there is the casting call that.
I guess my point is that, like, I didn't know. Did they really go, like, hey, we're doing Star Wars, and we're looking for someone to be, like, a big part of the movie, and they just advertise it? It's like, I always thought that, like, big movies like this were all kind of done, like, they would approach people, they would start to approach, and they go, oh, we want a Benicio del Toro, we want to have, I don't know, I can't even tell you who would be out there right now. That it's usually like when they announce somebody, at first you're like, well, and then you start thinking about it and you go, okay, I like this idea or I don't. It's like kind of like you never hear about, gosh, I mean, back in the 90s or even the aughts, there were actors that were, campaigning for, I guess my point is a lot of time when actors campaign for roles like these, unless you're Samuel L. Jackson, it's kind of like, it seems kind of sad. Because I remember, do you remember like Jean-Claude Van Damme's son that wanted to be in episode 7?
No, I don't remember.
Oh God, he literally like made like a video of him, basically a Star Wars kid type video where he's like, I know jujitsu and I can do all this stuff with the bow staff, and it was like you could go to a website and watch a video, and it was Jean-Claude Van Damme's son wanted to be a Sith. I want to be a Sith Lord or something, and it was just like obviously the guy's talented or something, but he was it's like that's not the kind of movie they're making, and it's.
Right.
It's, I don't know.
I mean, maybe this is like when a business organization is hiring people and they have, an internal candidate, but they're required by law to post the job.
You never know, though. That's true.
So, it could be that they have someone in mind for these roles, or they have like a type in mind and they're open to, there are a couple names that they're considering, but they're just, they have to put it on the casting sheet.
Yeah. It kind of makes sense, though. It's like if you think about California labor laws, they might have to post a job like this, even if they have no intention of hiring just someone off the street. If they just have to, legally they have to do it. That's actually probably why it's out there. So someone, so they can avoid a lawsuit in 10 years, like from Jean-Claude Van Damme's son.
Right.
It's like, I could have been the best Jedi. I don't have that lump on my noggin like my dad. I'd make great Sith Lord.
Yeah.
I don't even know if Jean-Claude's son grew up in Belgium. I apologize to Jean-Claude Van Damme's son.
Yeah. Can we go 1 week where we don't have to apologize to Jean-Claude Van Damme's son? I mean, honestly.
I know, man. Ridiculous. It's like he's my nemesis. I want to start like one of those Jimmy Kimmel, Matt Damon feuds where I just poop all over him every week and people feel sorry for him. It's kind of, I'm trying to market ourselves into I'm thinking forward to 2018. It's going to take a year to build up this rivalry.
Yeah.
Speaking of rivalries, do you think J.W. Rinsler has have a rivalry with this person writing this Making of Rogue One book that's coming out on October 3rd? Segue! So
this may be certainly not the first time that I've been proven wrong, but maybe the quickest I've ever been proven wrong, which is, so last week when we recorded the show, I think I said something like, we were talking about the lack of interesting extra features on the Rogue One Blu-ray, and I said something like, we're not getting the making of Episode 7 book, we're not getting a making of Rogue One book, and then, I don't know, maybe an hour or the following day after we posted the episode, sure enough, we find out that we are actually getting a making of Rogue One book, October 3rd. It is a, quote, behind-the-scenes oral history. So here's what the publisher synopsis says. Rogue One marks not, and here I'm quoting this whole thing. Rogue One marks not just the beginning of a new Star Wars story, but an entirely new approach to Star Wars storytelling, breaking away from the Skywalker saga and exploring new heroes, new tales, and new corners of the iconic galaxy far, far away. Featuring personal recollections and anecdotes from designers, creators, cast, and crew at all stages of production, as well as concept art and behind-the-scenes photos, this book offers an immersive look at Rogue One's journey to the screen. From the early decision to spin standalone stories and the hiring of visionary director Gareth Edwards, to the triumphs and challenges of principal photography and the exciting innovations of Industrial Light and Magic's post-production, making Rogue One, a Star Wars story, is the comprehensive oral history of this new film's production. So that is right. So, I mean, it's a comprehensive oral history in that, I guess those oral histories have become, or at least there haven't been recently, but for a while they were very popular on websites, to post, an oral history of the making of this classic album or something like that.
Right.
So we're basically getting a book length version of that. So, I mean, the question, you mentioned J.W. Rinsler, who was behind the previous, making of Star Wars books. The question is whether they're going to be more kind of archival as the original trilogy books were, or is it going to be more kind of promotional and, hey, we think we can sell this book, talking about what a great time we all had on Rogue One, the way that the prequel making of books got by the end. How much interesting stuff. I mean, it says there will be behind the scenes photos and concept art. I mean, that for me is, I think, probably the biggest question is, how much of that concept art is going to be different? How much of it is there going to be, and how much is it going to be? How much of that will be different than what was in the Art of Rogue One book? Because if there's going to be a lot of it and it's going to be completely different, I might be more inclined to do it. But if this is just kind of rehashing some of the stories of John Knoll's pitch and how they hired Gareth Edwards and, what, Riz Ahmed's day on set was like, I don't know how interesting that is going to be necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. It's like, it's like almost like, well, okay, if they've gotten kind of squeamish about these making ofs, which, again, this is my speculation only. It's just that it may be that being part of the reason that J.W. Rinsler's making of the Force Awakens book never happened. And maybe they go, well, we don't want to admit that, like, we had we don't want to admit, like, the Harrison Ford thing was way bigger, they way bigger of a problem. Like, we were actually looking into our, what do they call it? Completion bond, thinking about pulling the plug on the movie because he was the linchpin of the film. I mean, that's the kind of stuff, like, time is the only thing that would give these people the opportunity to tell that story, because now if it's only been like 2 years, they might be like, people go, hey, I don't want people knowing my business or whatever. Now these books, the timeline of these books, we'd think like, oh, they're going to come right out after the movie. And it's like, yeah, if Rogue One's not going to admit that how much they had to really get down and say, well, we refilmed all this and here's pictures from the way it was done before. It's like, if they're not going to do that kind of stuff, then I'm not really interested, because it's going to be a fun if it's going to be basically a book version of a featurette on a Blu-ray or whatever, with some nice pictures. It's like, it's not going to be, there's just something very, there's something very tenuous about the synopsis, which, I mean, synopsises are usually, it's less, what are we talking, 6 months away? Yeah, it's about 6 or 7 months away. So we assume it's the base of the book has been written, and it's probably in its editing phase, or maybe some sections are being rewritten. But generally, I think we have an idea, like personal recollections. It's like, well, how much perspective are you going to have from somebody? It's like, well, let me tell you where I was in 2015. It's like, what year is it? 2000. Like, so you're going to tell me where you were 2 years ago? How much they're still working at that. They can't go like, oh man, we had a rough weekend because we all went home thinking to ourselves, this isn't going to work. Whereas, like, okay, let's contrast that with, say, the DVD of The Phantom Menace, when even in the documentary they admit, like, problems with actors, problems with, natural disasters or whatever, problems with editing, people not being necessarily on board with what George had put together, and him being honest about him being frustrated with it. That's not something you're going to see now. And I'm kind of sad because I feel like, the fact that if Disney's whole thing is like, well, we're not going to admit that, these movies are fallible, and sometimes they aren't exactly what we wanted them to be. Right. Whereas I feel like part of the success of Rogue One is the fact that they realized that it wasn't working and they spent the money to fix it. So I think it would behoove them to admit it and show, like, no, like, it would be good for the fans. It would be good for investors, thinking, like, in some small way, they're like, well, at least Disney, like, they won't just take them, they're not going to repeat the mistakes of yore, which, what my point would be, the John Carter debacle, meaning that, a pretty decent action movie that could have had a good run in the theater that was completely undone by extremely poor marketing, that kind of stuff. I mean, which put people, like, which was the number one thing when Star Wars came out, was going to be a Disney production. I thought, oh, great. They did such a great job with John Carter of Mars, completely screwing the pooch on that. It's like, how are they going to treat Star Wars? So in some ways, like, if they showed, like, this is how we fix a problem, it would be more heartening, because I feel like, casual fans are not going to be picking these books up. That's why they're for nerds that want to know the nuts and bolts. So if there's no nuts and bolts, what's the point of buying this book?
Yeah, I mean, so for reference, here is... Now, I mean, this isn't a completely equal comparison, because this is the publisher synopsis or the summary on the inside flap of these books. But this is what the publisher summary for those J.W. Rensler, making of the movies from the original trilogy, right? So this is what those sound like, and this is the making of Star Wars. So there's a paragraph about George Lucas and influenced by Flash Gordon and Akira Kurosawa, all that. So then, second paragraph. Using his unprecedented access to the Lucasfilm archives and its trove of never-before-published lost interviews, photos, production notes, factoids, and anecdotes, Star Wars scholar J.W. Rensler hurdles readers back in time for an unprecedented behind-the-scenes look at the nearly decade-long quest of George Lucas and his key collaborators to make the little movie that became a phenomenon. For the first time, it's all here. The evolution of the now classic story and characters, including Anakin Starkiller and a huge green-skinned monster with no nose and large gills named Han Solo. And then, it lists several other things: the birth of industrial light and magic, the grueling, nearly catastrophic location shoot in Tunisia, but perhaps most exciting and rarest of all are the first interviews conducted before and during production and immediately after the release of Star Wars, in which George Lucas, the film stars, composer John Williams, effects masters Dennis Murin, Richard Edlund, and John Dykstra, Phil Tippett, Rick Baker, legendary production designer John Barry, and a host of others share their fascinating tales from the trenches and candid opinions of the movie that would ultimately change their lives. And so here's Empire Strikes Back, the making of Empire Strikes Back. Following the making of Star Wars, the author has once again made use of his unlimited access to the Lucasfilm archives and its hidden treasures of previously unpublished interviews, photos, artwork, and production mementos. The result is a comprehensive, behind-the-scenes, up-close and personal look at the trials and triumphs, risks and close calls, inspiration, perspiration, and imagination that went into every facet of this cinematic masterpiece. In addition, of course, are rare on-the-scene interviews with all the major players, and their names, the actors, the production folks, effects specialists. Punctuating the epic account is a bounty of drawings, storyboards, and paintings by Ralph McQuarrie, Joe Johnston, and Ivor Beddoes, along with classic and rare production photos. An added bonus is a foreword by acclaimed director Ridley Scott, right? So very different language than, you know, featuring personal recollections and anecdotes from designers, creators, cast, and crew at all stages of production. Right? It's the closest we get maybe is this line that says the triumphs and challenges of principal photography, and the comprehensive oral history of the film's new film's production. But you don't get the sense that, like, wow, this is, everything you could possibly want to know, stuff that, even 30 years after those movies came out, stuff that you hadn't read before or seen before, and completely new artwork that hadn't seen the light of day yet. And transcripts of the script conferences between George Lucas and, Lawrence Kasdan and Irvin Kershner, and, the great story about Harrison Ford, so that, I love you, I know scene in Empire Strikes Back, the fact that he and Carrie Fisher maybe even just like wrote that scene themselves. You don't get the sense that kind of stuff is going to be in this. And maybe, maybe we're putting too much of this on kind of Disney being secretive. Maybe it's just that there aren't those kinds of stories to tell with Rogue One and how it was made. The most interesting thing potentially is that, with those reshoots, it very well could be that they're like, look, we got into editing and decided it wasn't working. That, we knew how we wanted to end the movie, and we knew kind of what the middle of the movie was going to be. And so we needed to give this one character, we just needed to make it better. And yeah, we might find out what specifically wasn't working about it. But other than that, the triumphs and challenges of principal photography, that could just very well be like, oh yeah, it rained for a couple days and we had a hard time, shooting, or yeah, it was really hot in Jordan, which, while that certainly is a challenge, at this point, hearing that it was hot when shooting a Star Wars movie in the desert, we're like, yeah, sure. Just like, the 4 other movies that you did that with. So, I mean, it could be that maybe there's just not a lot of interesting kind of like, oh, here's the real scoop on what happened. Maybe there's just not a lot interesting that happened. And yeah, finding out kind of the specifics of the new technology that ILM was able to use is in there, and maybe some different concept art is in there, and that could be interesting. But I also feel like, we might find out some of that stuff at Celebration anyway. There's probably going to be a panel on ILM and the effects work they did on that, where John Knoll is going to say exactly what they did, and it's not going to be that different from what's going to be in the book. Or, there'll be a panel on the creatures and a panel on the effects, and we're going to learn behind the scenes stuff that way. So, I mean, I would guess that this book is going to end up being essentially for completists. And you could say that those original trilogy making of books are for completists too, because who else is going to spend, the initial retail price of like $50 on one of those things? But, they also had kind of new and interesting information in them, and I don't know that this one will necessarily.
Yeah, and I'm always presupposing conflict in these things, and I don't. That's probably says more about me than about them. It's that, I just hear little stories. I heard that, there was, I would like to hear obviously not Rogue One, but the effect of the production of Harrison Ford's injury. There'd been some stories, anecdotal stories that Carrie had maybe struggled, having not done a movie for so long and having to go back to a character after 30 plus years. It was frustrating, but maybe the fact that right there is the whole story. Yeah, the first day it sucked, and I went home and I went to bed early, and I got up the next day and it was fine. It might not be a thing where like people were like, oh my God, it might have just been more of an interpersonal kind of story. The one thing I did I was looking this up. Every time they say J.W. Rinsler, and I'm thinking like, that's a kind of a very unique name. The only other time I've ever heard Rinsler is it's actually the name of, did you ever see the second Tron movie, the one they did a few years ago?
No.
So there's a character in it he's kind of like he's almost like the Darth Vader circa New Hope kind of situation where he doesn't talk, and he's called Rinsler. And I thought, oh, it's just a coincidence. Turns out they actually they liked his name, and they named this character Rinsler because of J.W. Rinsler, which I just learned today, which is
interesting.
I know, and it's like he never had a connection. It doesn't have a connection to Lucasfilm. That movie doesn't. It was a Disney film, but way before Disney owned Star Wars. But so store that away, people.
Maybe he's just known to them as a huge Tron fan.
Yeah, I don't know.
He's written other things, I think.
Right. Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
But most of them are Star Wars related, I thought.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. It's like this book, if this book was like Paul M. Salmon's, Blade Runner book, I'd be excited. But the Blade Runner book, I forget the name of the book, which is
Future something.
Yeah, Future something. It's it's still, even with the subsequent Blu-ray documentary on Blade Runner, it's still, I feel like it's still the essential written word on Blade Runner the film. And maybe
Future Noir.
Yeah, Future Noir. It's just been so long since I've had a book like that where you're just like, you're just pouring all this information. And maybe that's the kind of the flattening of trivia with the internet now, that I can just go on and go, while you're talking, I can Google J.W. Rinsler Tron and get the story. I don't need like a 500-page book to tell me these things now. These oral histories have become few and far between, and what people want out of them might not be, the kind of like salacious or intriguing bits. Or like, maybe people's appetite for that is dwindled. Although I would find that shocking. That people's need for gossip has dwindled in the last 20 years. There's another book coming out.
Yeah, so while I was looking that up, I also ran across, or maybe someone posted it on Twitter, ran across, I mean, with this being the 40th anniversary and Force Friday coming in the fall, I mean, you can imagine that they're going to be producing a lot of books and things. So one of the things that's coming out in late October is called Star Wars Stormtroopers, a complete guide. I didn't really... Well, so I assume this will be some kind of combination between like text on the development of these characters, but also maybe like a visual guide to the different kinds of stormtroopers that they've developed over the years and their origins in the clone troopers and all, how all those designs came together, and like I said, kind of a visual dictionary style. I can't imagine this is going to be like heavy on text about.
Yeah, I think it might.
Stormtroopers, or maybe, I mean, you could even imagine like maybe they'll have a few, a brief thing about the phenomenon of why they're so popular and people dressing up. But the only reason I put it in here is because I don't know. I don't want to like begrudge anyone latching on to whatever characters to like they want to like, but it's the whole thing of like, I mean, these are space Nazis. Y'all know that, right? Like, I think the thing I said on Twitter was, this is basically like everything you've always wanted to know about space Nazis, but were afraid to ask. Like, yeah, cool, like stormtroopers if you want, but I mean, they're in this weird position of, yeah, these are space Nazis. And Star Wars ultimately is about, good versus evil and all of those good, tropes, thematic, thematic themes, myths and all of that good stuff. At the same time, then when they write the novels or, make movies maybe or whatever else, they have to come up with like interesting characters and show that, well, maybe not all stormtroopers are bad, and some of them, are really just, people who serve the Empire are doing it because they, really think order is important and law and stability, and they're not really evil, they're just, whatever else. It's like, yeah, but they're also space Nazis, right? Like, that's ultimately, let's not lose sight of that. And so, again, I don't want to begrudge anyone for really being into Stormtroopers and all of that, but it's like, yeah, I mean, and it's not, I mean, I would hope that at some point, the book acknowledges that in the way it describes these Stormtroopers and what they do and what purpose they serve in the Empire. It's like, yeah, these are about like crushing people and making sure that no one tries to like speak up against the Empire, right? These aren't just about like, oh, this is just the local police force or whatever. Like, this is about a specific purpose, and that purpose is not a good one. So I don't know. I don't want to. I mean, I don't know if you have anything to add to that or not. It's just I saw that and it's like, yeah, I get it, but at the same time, it's like.
But no, what you bring up is and that's the thing. It's like we've talked about this many times before. It's that kind of thing, because it's like, this is the weird thing about Star Wars is like, I feel like, it's sometimes it's like, I was trying to explain this to somebody the other night and I was like, I don't feel I ever articulated. It's like, it's that weird sweet spot when I feel like Star Wars happens and then like, but it seems like as time goes on, it's so hard to hit that middle because it's like, you always go, I always use that analogy when I was younger, try to explain like, I'd be going to like the special edition or one of the Star Wars movies, and like maybe my grandmother, who I don't think she ever saw Star Wars, she'd ask me a question. I'd explain, well, they're kind of like, she grew up, she was a young mother during World War II, and it's like, well, she would understand the analogy of what Nazis are. So I would use that like, well, it's kind of like space Nazis versus they're like the Axis versus the Allies, but it's a very like, it has a very simplistic story. So it's like, but now that because of the marketing, meaning that they want to sell, toys and stuff. So Lucasfilm's in this weird thing where like, well, they've always been in this, when they get to be more, they keep on having this, people have this thirst for I want more of the real world in my Star Wars movies. And it's like, well, then you have to deal with the idea of like, okay, well, you're also selling like these evil totalitarian armies costumes to little children to walk around in. And it's like, well, how do you balance that? And I feel like Disney's probably going to constantly maybe undersell the partial inspirations. And I mean, I don't think they should ever shy away from the inspirations for these things, because I feel like it's a good vector for people to kind of get interested in, like, not that Star Wars is history, but I think it's like, well, okay, well, let's go out and read about how things like this happen in the real world. Whereas I feel like Star Wars has always been a poor franchise for depicting reality. But it's like that kind of thing where it's like, it's like I collect, I've been buying these Black Series figures, and then I realized like I'm only buying Stormtroopers. And it's like, well, people say, well, collecting is important sometimes if you don't want to spend a lot of money, is to have a focus. And then it's like, well, now I'm like up to 6 Stormtroopers in my collection. I'm like, well, how far do I want to go with this? Because it's like, part of me is like, well, I don't want to turn into I don't want to be like one of those people that, make that gaffe it seems like every couple years somebody will make that gaffe where it's some clothing designer or like Brian Ferry from Roxy Music will say something about, oh, the Nazis had style. And it's like, it's that kind of thing where it's like, well, or Lemmy Kilmister from Motorhead collecting, real Nazi memorabilia. It always gets to be that kind of thing where it's like, you're almost, it's not that being into Stormtroopers is celebrating Nazism. It's just the idea that we are kind of, people tend to, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, you actually are kind of attracted to an authoritarian aesthetic, kind of, I guess. I don't even know how to write, but it's like, it's like that thing where it's like, well, then let's have a book. But then again, it's like, these everything that, well, not everything, but the specific designs were, people, they would riff off of these things and they would create something, new armors and stuff. I mean, there is an artistry to it. I don't feel like it's somebody, them trying, like somebody said like, hey, this is our way to get, this stuff out for people to see again. Let's just insert it into Star Wars. I don't feel like that's what there's no nefarious purpose, but yeah, it's that kind of, it's almost like I'm sidestepping the fact that, like, well, yeah, they want to market the good side and the bad side to the kids. Like, you can be good, you can be bad.
Yeah.
It's like,
well, and I mean, I guess I should say, I mean, some of that is demand that's kind of beyond their control, right? I mean, Darth Vader became this phenomenon. I don't think they expected that. And so a friend of mine has a daughter who is, I'll say 5 now. And she loves Captain Phasma. I don't think she saw the movie, but just that character, she maybe like saw something related to that character somewhere. She loves Captain Phasma. She loves Darth Vader. She like carries around this like little Darth Vader doll. And I mean, she kind of knows right from wrong. She's not, I mean, she's 5, but she's also not like, yes, or, Law and Order is the way to go, and the rebels were just a bunch of rabble-rousers. She's not like that, but there's something about those characters that spoke to her, hit her right in the in a way that makes her like really enjoy those characters and those costumes and everything, and yeah, I too, when I first saw Return of the Jedi, those scout troopers, the ones on the speeder bikes, I thought I was like, oh, those helmets are great. With Rogue One, the shore troopers, especially, those costumes are great with or at least the ones with kind of the tan, but then the light blue streak across them. Like, that's a great color scheme and a nice looking design for that kind of character and that armor and everything. So I mean, some of this, I think maybe, and not that you were like telling me to walk this back, but listening to you, I mean, I guess I was thinking a little bit about, it's hard to remember sometimes that the Star Wars is this kind of phenomenon that they didn't expect and kind of ran away from them, that they're still like trying to catch up with, or maybe they've caught up with it by now. But the huge demand for like people dressing up as Darth Vader and people loving the Stormtroopers, like, I don't think that was ever anything they initially expected. And so from their perspective, this isn't necessarily like, hey, we're going to market these Stormtroopers and we're going to tell people to dress up like Stormtroopers because we are interested in like, shades of moral gray or whatever. But it's just like, people want to buy them. And so if people want to buy them, we're willing to sell them to them. And then on the space Nazi thing, I mean, maybe I need to stop calling them that, because I mean, I do sometimes think like maybe that trivializes actual Nazis to just call these fictional characters space Nazis, right? I mean, that's kind of on the one hand. On the other hand, then you have that scene in episode 7 with, Hux's speech, and it's like, okay, yeah, those are space Nazis.
Yeah, they kind of doubled down. I don't
right,
honestly, like, I don't feel any reason for you to stop using that term, because on some level, I think, I honestly, it kind of makes my case that I keep hammering down, which eventually people are going to tell me to shut up, is that I always think Star Wars is a poor place to go for your morality. It really is. Right. It really isn't your plate. You're supposed to bring, your goodness to it. Don't go look for your goodness from it, because it's not, it doesn't prescribe it actually, as time goes on, even though you would say, well, George, he tried to undercut the concept that, like, every time we watch a Star Wars movie, we're watching people one group murdering another group. So he sidestepped that by making them all droids in the Phantom Menace, and then he sidesteps it again by saying, "Hey, the space Nazis, the space stormtroopers, the actual term that they use, now they're clone troopers, and they're actually on our side." Until the bad guy just flips a switch, and they all go. I think intellectually, it's like it's good to remind people that these things can be. Not that I ever feel the Lucasfilm is trying to push forward a political agenda or an ideology or anything like that. But it's the idea that, when I felt I was so deft last week, kind of trying to explain my feelings about the Jar Jar Binks thing. And again, I'm returning to this idea that it's kind of, not that there's no place to talk about the morality of the movies and what kind of morality that these things display. Is just the point that if for people who really want Lucasfilm to be like, I want you to have an ideological thread through this movie that I can be sure, they're doing the right thing. And it's like, well, if you look at the origins and how you market movies, it's going to be much more thorny than being like, a movie genre prescribing a specific morality. There is more shades of gray, at least in Star Wars, and I feel that's why, even though evil things externally in our world inspired aesthetics in the Star Wars world, they're not supposed to be analogous. You know what I mean? It's like there is supposed to be that kind of that situation, just because it's like I was watching something about the Volkswagen, and one of the guys from the Top Gear he did a thing about cars, and he kind of pointed out the fact that the hippie car of the 70s and the 80s, like when I was a teenager, it's like the Volkswagen Beetle was a symbol of personal freedom, and the idea that it was an inexpensive car that was relatively cheap to maintain, that a person worked at Burger King could afford, and that's what that symbolized. But if you go back if you go back 50 years or 60 years at the time, it was a car designed for Nazis. It was like, we need something that any person that was in the army or whatever, or even a citizen of Germany, it's important to make a distinction. Not all Germans were Nazis. But it was like, that was an affordable car for them too. But it was created and approved by the National Socialist power structure, and they set up the thing, and you're like, oh, well, that's like, so every hippie you ever saw was, or how NASA was in, Operation Paperclip, which I'm sorry if I'm talking like some Alex Jones thing, but after World War II, they took scientists and they built the rockets that took us to the moon. But it's like, it's not that that's not really that's probably a bad analogy, but I'm saying these things, they infect society in different ways. So one thing is not always just because it kind of directly inspired. I don't know. I'm kind of like, at this point, I don't know how to finish what I'm saying. I just want to say Nazis. I just want to say Nazis are bad on the record.
Yeah. Right. I think we're very clear on our anti-Nazi.
I don't know.
Stance.
I don't think we didn't prepare to have this conversation, so I have no idea.
No, we didn't. I just because I didn't know that you would have anything to add. I just kind of wanted to get that off my chest. But it is a good transition, I think, to talk about this weekend's episode of Star Wars Rebels.
Yes.
Through Imperial Eyes. This is the episode in which the Rebels are little ghost crew group have discovered that the Imperials are monitoring Fulcrum's transmissions now. Fulcrum being the secret, identity of a person or group of people who kind of give the Rebels assignments and tell them, kind of what where to go, what to do. Fulcrum used to be Ahsoka Tano. It's now Agent Kallus of the Empire, who's disillusioned with the Empire. So they discovered that the Empire, or at least someone, monitored Fulcrum's last transmission. And so Ezra and the two droids go undercover and get themselves captured just outside of Lothal, or just, out of Lothal's atmosphere, to rescue Kallus, right? So Ezra is posing as a bounty hunter because he has a different helmet on, is basically how that works. And then he has Chopper with him, and then the Alan Rickman droid, whose name escapes me. So they get captured. Kallus figures out who they are, and then Thrawn shows up and has Ezra and the droids brought to his ship. So at this point, Kallus is the only one who knows that the prisoner is Ezra Bridger. So they get brought to the Chimera, Thrawn's Star Destroyer. He doesn't meet with Ezra yet, but he has a meeting with Governor Price and Kallus and a few other people where he lets them know that he's figured out that there's an Imperial mole, right, who's feeding information to the rebels. He's like, it's the only logical explanation for their success and the way they've been able to anticipate our movements. At that meeting, he also introduces Colonel Yularen, former Admiral Yularen. So this is Wolf Yularen. He was just a background kid, basically like an extra in A New Hope. He's one of the old Imperial officers sitting at the table on the Death Star. They then put him in the Clone Wars as an admiral for the Republic, and now he is a colonel with the ISB. And so he's going to assist in that investigation. We find out that Kallus was one of Yularen's star pupils at the Imperial Academy he attended. So Kallus knows that, they might be onto him. So he, in turn, throws suspicion on a lower-ranking lieutenant by, switching out his code cylinders. We finally get to see those little things that look like pens sticking out of their pocket. Those are code cylinders that basically get you in and out of, high security areas, apparently. So he's able to throw suspicion on the lieutenant that way. Thrawn and Yularen get on the lieutenant's tail. He told the lieutenant that it was Governor Price who was the mole, and so he's been tailing Price and tries to arrest Price or grab her, which leads her and Yularen to think that, he really was the mole. Kallus pretends to capture this lieutenant, but instead of escaping with Ezra and the droids, he says he's going to stay behind. He thinks he can do more good there. Following that, though, we get a discussion between Thrawn and Yularen, where Thrawn says he figured out that Kallus is Fulcrum, and he says Agent Fulcrum will be more useful to us than Agent Kallus, basically. So then we leave the episode knowing that Thrawn knows that Kallus is Fulcrum, but Kallus doesn't know that Thrawn knows. He thinks that he got away with his little deception. And so the reason this episode is called Through Imperial Eyes is, I guess they kind of focus on the Imperial side of the story, but also the opening of the show before the main title screen is literally seen through Kallus's eyes. So it's basically from the Prodigy video for a song. I don't know if we want to say the title of it, but
come on.
All right, so Smack My Bitch Up is the name of the song. The video was controversial, right? So it takes place. It's a POV. It's shot from a person's perspective, kind of throughout their day. They're waking up. They're hanging around their apartment. Eventually, at night, they go out to party with friends, and they do drugs and they drink. This person hits a woman. Or has a fight with a woman, and so you think this is not right. And then at the very end, the person looks into the bathroom mirror, and you see it was a woman the whole time. The fact that she hit another woman makes it better, I guess.
Yeah, I never understood the morality of that video. It's like, oh, I'm sorry, violence upon another person. Right. It doesn't matter your gender; it's still bad.
I don't know that it was like a morality thing, or like, ha ha ha, you thought it was a man, but by showing that it's a woman, we just revealed your own bias. That you assumed this would be a man.
So it's like that SNL skit where all the teenagers do like their little like morality. It's their morality plays, and the morality is always way murky, and the audience goes, "What was that about?"
Right. Yeah, exactly. So I mean, this is basically like the Prodigy video because you just see it's the person's POV, and then he looks in the mirror above the sink, and you see it's Kallus. So it's like, oh, okay. On Rebels Recon, Dave Filoni said that his initial idea for the episode was that it would basically be all shot that way, or at least as much as possible. And then they figured out that really wasn't going to be workable for various reasons. And so that was kind of the leftover, the remnant of that idea was in that beginning. Other things in this episode, it's the blogs, capital T, capital B, also watched Rebels Recon, and they, zeroed in on the discussion that the production or I can't remember what his title is, but the guy who's in charge of the art department and the animation department. Anyway, they basically put a lot of Easter eggs into Thrawn's room, his office, and so you get clone trooper helmet that is likely a character we saw in Revenge of the Sith, someone who was on Kashyyyk when Order 66 went down. You see the Grail Cup from Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, but then you also see a reproduction of a Ralph McQuarrie concept painting for what would become Lothal. So the Ralph McQuarrie and the show had talked about this back in the beginning, that the look of Lothal was inspired by this one Ralph McQuarrie concept painting, and so they basically reproduced that concept painting. They didn't just create a new painting of Lothal; they recreated that specific Ralph McQuarrie painting, and they put that in Thrawn's office. We see Thrawn sparring with, and then later actually fighting with, those Dark Forces style assassin droid, those Dark Trooper droids that we got in a previous episode. There's some, when Ezra is in his holding cell, the lighting, this is just something I picked up on. The lighting of it is very reminiscent of, the Tabana gas chamber in Cloud City and in The Empire Strikes Back. The darkness of it with the reds and the blacks and all that. So that was kind of another neat thing. But that was that episode. So we were talking about, well, these are space Nazis, and do we really need to get inside their heads and talk about, well, there are some good ones, and now we have this episode about someone who started out as an Imperial, a space Nazi officer, and then decided like, no, this really isn't what I thought it was, and is starting to help out the rebellion now. So what did you think about this episode, Robert?
Well, one just to add to your Easter egg thing, when the battle droid or Dark Forces style assassin droids go after Thrawn during because Kallus reprograms them.
Right.
He says he basically says something like, Command Rook. He actually says the name of which for people that don't know, the original where Thrawn was introduced was the Timothy Zahn's Heir to the Empire trilogy, and Rook was the name of a commander, like an assassin of a race called the Nogri, which is retconned as being kind of a hidden, like a shadow assassin or protection unit for Darth Vader that that Thrawn took upon when the Empire crumbled, and they were he used their devotion to Vader as a leverage, and Rook was his commander, and that whole race and that character factors into the finale of that trilogy. So it's kind of a nice little Easter egg there.
I had wondered if that was a word or language that we had been exposed to in any of the Zahn books or previous Thrawn stuff. So yeah, that's neat.
And also, the other observation is like, I must be like, I don't think we've ever talked about this, or maybe we have and I just forgot. Like, I was watching the Oscars and I was following Twitter and they said, oh, Star Wars star David Oyelowo. And I'm like,
oh yeah.
I'm like, huh? I don't remember him in a Star Wars movie. Was he like, and then I'm like, look up, he's the voice of Agent Kallus and has been since season 1. I obviously was not, sometimes I'm a little weird like that when it comes to like cartoons and comic books. I've noticed I have this thing where I tend not to remember who wrote or drew comic books, and I tend to not remember always who does the voices on cartoons. I don't know. It's just some kind of thing about the way I process this stuff. But yeah, I was kind of surprised. I'm like, they've got they've got Oscar nominated actors doing voices on these, and I'm like, oh. But yeah, no, overall it was kind of, it's like the Through Imperial Eyes, what I thought I might be getting and what I got were two different things. I don't know if I actually wanted an episode that showed me like, kind of a day in the life, or, when they say eyes, it's like, I always think eyes is like your focal point. It's your perspective. So I thought, well, maybe they're going to have, kind of the idea of like, well, this is what it's like to be in the Empire, but that's not really what the story was about. If anything, it proved, well, maybe in some ways maybe this was their point, that they showed the callousness of the not to turn a phrase, the callousness of the Empire. I mean, there was that one scene, and I've talked about it before, I liked at the end of the, whatever the version of the Rebels version of the Defiant Ones, which was Kallus and Zeb on that planet, and they detente of a sort becomes, and he returns back to his Imperial and finds that he has no friendship, no fellowship in the Empire, that it's a bureaucracy, and basically, I guess in some small way, this is an elaboration on that point, and maybe that's the maybe back to what you're talking about. Maybe this is the way that Lucasfilm kind of sidesteps the morality question of how do you get people to like buy products on both sides of the battle and not endorse a greater narrative, and maybe it's just it's a comment on people that are always constantly jockeying for position. Whereas, Kallus, in some ways it's a little strange because when he sets up this kind of his subterfuge, which is quite complex, of this, I forget the character's name.
Lieutenant Lisk.
Yeah, Lisk or something. And he, it's like, I don't think they really established that guy is particularly evil or anything. He's just
he's just kind of hapless and eager to please.
Yeah, eager to please. He's, he works for the corporation and he's trying to do his best to improve his position, like all that kind of Machiavellian or in some ways, like the Roman Senate or what, what I mean? It's like a centurion or whatever. That it was an interesting take. Almost in some ways, having Ezra there was a distraction. It might have been more interesting if they had done maybe just a random, maybe a courier that maybe they've gotten to the point where that they're spying, and here I am rewriting the episode. Sorry, but it's just the idea that maybe like a courier comes and he was supposed to bring a message to Fulcrum because it's gotten to be too risky to do electronic he gets thing and he has to do something to make sure that message isn't beat out of the suspect. And so Thrawn, I mean, the minute I realized that there was going to be kind of like, I don't know what you call it, that shell game playing with I knew, I was like, oh yeah, this is going to end with Thrawn knowing that it's Kallus, because I've been waiting for every time this comes up that it's obvious that Thrawn knows Kallus is Fulcrum. I think this episode just kind of proved it to him, I think
Mm-hmm.
if you know this character, that's the way he is. He always part of the appeal of the character that people like about him is that he's always one step ahead of everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And he also he immediately learns from his if he makes an error, he immediately learns from that and never makes that error again. He's not like a character, at least in the depictions in the books, he wasn't filled with hubris.
Right.
He was like, it was a thing he knew just as easily as anyone else through his own incompetence, he could, all this could go away, and over leveraging your influence. And I mean, when he comes to his demise in the end of that trilogy, a spoiler alert, it's just a miscalculation. It wasn't like this personality flaw that keeps being, repeated, that kind of idea where it's like,
it's not like tragic in that sense.
Yeah, it's not a tragedy.
It's just like, oh, he didn't realize how insane this one guy was.
Exactly. He couldn't. He maybe underestimated Joris Saboth, and then it kind of all falls like a House of Cards. Actually, no, it's not Joris Saboth that's really his undoing. It's really his over leveraging on the Nogri to kind of do his dirty work. Anyway, I'm sorry. I'm going to get into like a 20-minute conversation about the heir to the Empire, and I won't. Yeah, it's just that, I mean, I liked it. It was kind of like, but I think the Ezra thing was a distraction. I'm a firm proponent of, oh God, I was going to say Ivan Reitman. What's the droid? What's the droid? The Alan Rickman droid.
Oh yeah.
Because that's what my wife said. She goes, "Oh, well, why does that droid sound like Alan We never talked about it.
I mean, that has to be what they were going for, right?
Yes, I think it's that kind of, and that's my, that's who I wish was in the comic books with Dr. Aphra, but can't have everything.
Yeah, I mean, I hadn't even thought of that until you said it, but I think you could cut out Ezra from this episode and still maintain most of it. I mean, the thing that Ezra is good for is basically, right, Ezra, they get Ezra out of his, holding cell, and then they have to escape, and so they have to hide and make sure that Thrawn doesn't find them. So there's that kind of, that dramatic tension. But I mean, I don't know. I think you could, all the rest of it, just the basic framework of the story of, Thrawn announces he's figured out who Fulcrum is, or that there's an Imperial mole. He brings in Yularen. Kallus throws suspicion on someone else, and then at the end, Thrawn announces he's figured out it's Kallus. Like, you don't really need Ezra to accomplish any of those things. So, yeah, I mean, it was. I think we maybe had similar expectations in that when Ezra showed up, I was like, oh, I thought this was. I mean, and he shows up pretty early, but like, oh, this isn't just Kallus going about his business, and we're not getting, like you said, the Imperial perspective on what they're trying to accomplish and how they're trying to get the Ghost Crew. We're not just seeing their side of the story on this, where this is we're getting Ezra and they're trying to bust out Kallus and all that. So yeah, I mean, obviously you want to. I don't think they've developed Kallus enough as a character really to give him his own episode without any of the Ghost Crew there. Right. So if you don't include Ezra and Kanan makes an appearance and Rex makes an appearance and the droids, obviously, I mean, if you don't include any of them, that I think would be like a really radical departure for the show. And maybe there would be people watching who would say like, well, why aren't they in the episode? Like, this is a show about them, ostensibly, right? So they need to be in the show every week. And maybe that is a rule that they've set for themselves. Maybe not. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's like when Kanan shows up, and like a lot of Kanan and then they're all just kind of like they're slowly approaching, and then they have like a little shootout, and then that's kind of it. I mean, I guess that's a Star Wars trope, and I've always said how much I enjoy like anytime when it's like they're shooting at each other and escaping at the last minute. I actually like that's like peak Star Wars action to me.
And someone on Twitter, I think, asked Pablo Hidalgo once, in relation to other things, we said, how long does it take ships to get through hyperspace? And his answer was basically, however it takes, they're as fast or as slow as they need to be for the story.
Exactly.
It's so.
Well, I've complained about that too, because it's like The Force Awakens, like basically everybody gets everywhere in 2 seconds. It's kind of like, right. Wow.
Right.
But that's because that story is super fast paced. And then, and then it's like, well, Empire, there's no hyperdrive, and it feels like people are out there for months, kind of. So yeah, right. It makes sense. But yeah, that's your Lauren guy, which I didn't realize that he's actually supposed to be somebody who's kind of in A New Hope, who's at the conference table with the rest of the thing. And I was gonna say like, oh, I bet you anything he's gonna realize that, Kallus, he's gonna help Kallus escape or something because they have this relationship. But not if he's old school Empire. He was probably just as shocked as everyone else. So I'm probably. But it also makes me wonder. It's like so. Ezra features in this episode on, I would say, kind of extraneously, but you would say that like maybe they need it. But now next week the tease, I think I didn't watch the tease, but I've seen little images. Is that we're going to get the Maul Kenobi episode that we've been getting teased for a month or so. So
is that right? Well, I know maybe that's, I don't know if that's next week. I know we were also getting Mon Mothma next week.
Maybe I'm wrong. Yeah. Maybe.
So I mean, I think the Obi-Wan versus Maul is coming up at the end of the season, which as we've talked about, we're closer to the end than we are at the beginning.
Oh, you're right. Twin Sons is another 2 episodes. It doesn't even come out till the 18th of March. My mistake.
Yeah. So as I've seen it described, I haven't watched this clip yet myself, but basically, we have this one band of rebels here at Lothal. We have bands of rebels elsewhere. We have Hera's father and his group on, of course, Ryloth and other places that we've been learning about, not just in the show, but in the books and the comic books and all that. So it sounds like this next episode is where we're starting to see all of those groups get stitched together into the Rebel Alliance. And so I think we're getting that. So, this week was very heavy on the Imperial side. Next week, I think will be, more on the Rebellion side, is fitting with the show's title. But yeah, we are going to get that Obi-Wan versus Darth Maul fight. And I mean, I have to assume it's not just going to be about Maul and Obi-Wan Kenobi, but if it is, I mean, again, that's a pretty dramatic departure for the show that they feel confident that, one of the big crescendos of the season is with these 2 characters, neither of whom are core characters for the show. I mean, Obi-Wan Kenobi, you could argue, is a core character for the saga generally, and Maul, I guess, is a core character for that kind of prequels Clone War era, I guess. I mean, once they put him in the Clone Wars, he became more of a core character, but I would say he's still kind of a side character who shows up sometimes and then goes away for a while. So to have a fight between those 2 characters be, one of the climaxes, one of the crescendos of, one of the high points of the end of the season, I mean, that's kind of interesting too, dramatically, that they feel confident enough in the show that they can do that. Now, again, part of that is because it's Obi-Wan Kenobi, and you have people who that character is already. But if that had been some other new former Jedi that we had learned of, that episode or in the previous episode, I don't know that would stand up as well. So, I mean, you're right though. It is this kind of, they are getting to the point where they've been using the previous season and this season to kind of blow out the universe, right? To expand kind of the scope of the show. And so now they're getting to the point where, Sabine's gone, who knows what's going to happen with the rest. They're kind of feeling more comfortable of bringing these stories and bringing these plot points and these kind of dramatic notes, the story beats don't necessarily have to include the Ghost crew either.
Right.
So that's you're right. I think that is interesting that they're doing that.
Yeah, it's like, and the reason I was like, well, if they had felt they had to have Ezra, like, and then if like the next episode is him trying to talk Maul out of fighting Kenobi, but then obviously there's a gap, so my observation doesn't match up. But yeah, it's like I said, I feel like they could have experimented more. Again, it's a kids show, and I forget that sometimes, that they have to make a concession to keeping, young people's attention. And if they maybe they thought creatively, if they didn't have any of their favorites, that it would be people would be like, I didn't like that episode. It didn't have any of my favorites in it.
Honestly, I could see adults saying that too. I don't think it's just kids. I mean, because I was thinking about that.
Well, I say it about books. If they don't have enough of my favorites in the books, I complain. So you have seen adults do that.
I was thinking about that when I was watching the show too. I mean, it is, I wouldn't say it's a dark episode, but it is a very serious episode. And there is kind of tension throughout the whole episode of like, oh, is Thrawn going to find out? And B, when is he going to find out? And what's going to happen to Kallus? Is he going to get trapped? So there is that kind of air of tension throughout the episode of, kind of the walls are starting to close in on him. So, and for a kid show, that's, I don't, that's a pretty serious tone to take. So,
right.
I mean, yeah, it is a kid show, but a kid show can be all kinds of different things and can take all kinds of different approaches. But yeah, I think that like, well, why isn't Ezra in this kid? I could envision adults saying that too. I didn't say that just with the kid show aspect in mind, but I mean, that is part of it that I think, right? Like, okay, it's called Star Wars Rebels. We made this show about, a young person, a person who's either our viewers' age or a little bit older than our viewers' age that they can identify with. We need to keep that person in the show because that's the character that we want our viewers to identify with, So, I think that's part of it too.
Yeah, I mean, the last thing I'll say on Rebels even as a show, it's like I was with a group of Star Wars fans here last night, and kind of it's like a meeting for collectors here in Seattle, and this Rebels came up, and it's kind of interesting. It really runs the gamut of opinions. Some people were like, I hate Rebels. It's too slow. Some people are saying, I love Rebels. I heard somebody actually say they enjoyed Rebels more than they enjoyed The Force Awakens. And it's like, but I guess my point is there really is kind of a smattering of opinions on where Rebels kind of fits in the grand Star Wars scheme. Some people consider it essential, and some people don't even bother.
Right.
It's like that kind of thing, and I can't imagine how maybe that's something that Dave Filoni and crew don't really have to, like, it's like, heck, if we start thinking about that, we're never going to get any work done. So we're just going to try to put our best foot forward and try to like realize we're on Disney XD, but it's probably a show that has more adult viewers on it than any show on it that would be on the entire Disney network. Although I don't know. If I had kids, maybe, I don't know, do adults watch the same shows their kids do now? I
have no idea.
Exactly. I don't. My brother doesn't. Mostly it's like, right. If he needs the kids to watch TV, it's because he has to do something else. So he's not watching it with them. That's all. Yeah. That's the only thing I've got to work with.
But I mean, clearly the show has done well enough that they were given, at least 3 seasons.
Yeah.
So
it's no dog with a blog, but
yeah,
which I don't know what that is. I just love that.
I don't either. I've heard of that show, but is it exactly what it sounds like? I mean, is it like a live journal? Is it a blog spot? Is it a what is it? Right. What do they do now that blogging is not what it used to be?
Yeah, exactly. And it definitely isn't.
Yeah.
So I guess we could wrap up there. We've been going for a while.
Yeah, I think that's a good place to end it this.
what should I say? Well, as far as looking towards next week or next episode, I don't know. Never know for sure if we're doing a show at week to week. Things come up. I am going to the Emerald City Comic-Con on Friday. Well, I don't know when people are hearing this, so that'd be Friday the 3rd of March. I will put this on Twitter. If anybody that happens to be from out of town, listens to the show, wants to stop by and say hi. I don't know what we do. I'm not suggesting a meetup because I'm pretty sure that we're not going to get many takers on this. But if you want to come say hi, I'll shake your hand. You can see what I look like in real life. It's pretty terrifying. But there's going to be a Timothy Zahn panel I'm hoping to attend. So I might be able to have some tidbits about the forthcoming Thrawn book. Hopefully somebody will ask, hey, maybe that's a good thing. If there's a Q&A, if somebody has a good question, you might want to throw it out to me before I go. And the best way to do that is send it to hosts, HOSTS. Yeah, I was going to say HOTS. Yeah, send it to HOTS, our hotline. No, host.
That's our other secret email.
Yeah, that's how we actually pay. That's how we pay for the show. It's my ChatterBait account. So anyway, it's hosts. That's host with an S at talkingbirdcast.com. We have Twitter at talkingbirdcast. We have the talkingbirdcast.com website. We also have talkingbirdcast.com/Amazon, which that is one of those good old fashioned Amazon affiliate links. What you do is you use that before you visit Amazon. It takes you right into Amazon. Then you go buy something. Might be pre-order yourself. Although the pre-orders for Rogue One aren't up for some reason on Amazon, or if you were going to pick up pre-order Battlefront 2, which is, we should talk about that in the future. There's Battlefront 2 is on the cusp. And what it does is it just kicks a little back to us. It doesn't cost you anything extra, and we always appreciate it. Did you have anything you wanted to add?
Thanks as always for listening.
Yes. I have been Robert Zachary.
I'm still John Llewellyn.
Thanks for listening, and may the Force be with you.